Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast with your host, Jerry Rogers.
Welcome to the Business of America, Jerry Rogers. We're back, and today we're with the president, CEO of the American Chemistry Council, Jahn, and we're going to talk today about the importance of American chemistry, the science, the innovation, what it means to working families, what it means for modernity. And before we get into that, though, I want to introduce our guest for this week, Jahn, again, President and CEO of American Chemistry Council. Before we start, why don't we just talk a little bit about your background and a little bit about American Chemistry Council?
Sure. So I've been the CEO of ACC for 4 years now, going on 4 years, and have been working representing folks in the chemical industry for the past 17 years. And before that, I worked on Capitol Hill for 10 years. So for better or worse, I'm one of those swamp creatures in Washington, D.C. ACC, the American Chemistry Council, we represent companies in the business of chemistry. So those are names like Dow and DuPont that most folks would recognize. But it also is, global companies like that down to small manufacturers in all over the United States. And they manipulate molecules to make modern life possible. And pretty much everything that's manufactured depends on our members, starts with our members. So your phone, the chair I'm sitting in, the computer screen, all that starts with our members in the business of chemistry.
So it should be the American Everything Council. It's interesting because we take things for granted, and preparing for the interview, I was thinking about that, how if the American Chemistry Council goes away, and our audience, our listeners and viewers might think, well, how can the industry go away? Because of politics, because of regulation, because of overzealous bureaucrats, and to start off, we want a robust government. We want the EPA. We want science and modernity and regulations in the law. We believe in the rule of law. We believe in all these things. However, for innovation to happen, for these companies to thrive, and then you get the trickle-down civics of helping Main Street, what are some of the regulatory obstacles or the government interventions or interference that are a threat or hurt the forward movement towards modernity and innovation?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And to be clear, the business of chemistry is already the most heavily regulated sector of the entire manufacturing industry. So there's over 1 million restrictions on the manufacture of chemistry in the Code of Federal Regulations right now. And the compliance cost of that is several $1 billion per year. I'm not even complaining about any of that right now. What I am concerned about, and what I've raised directly with the administration, is there are 13 proposed regulations that would have a collective cost on our industry of $7 billion, $7 billion per year, and would increase our compliance costs by at least 50%. And so as we go forward, the concern is that you're going to kill the golden goose. So if you're concerned about implementing the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Science and Chips Act, the president talks a lot about manufacturing things in this country. If you're going to stop our ability to manufacture chemicals in this country that support electric vehicles, solar panels, other materials that the administration is looking for, that's going to be a big problem.
Well, let me ask you a two-part question. I get in trouble when I do this because I always forget the first part. But first part, the EPA and other agencies, the White House, and what their political and policy agenda is, how well do they coordinate, work with you through regulations and through understanding the science? And then I'd follow up, and that is, most people think, well, these big companies, you could absorb the costs. What are you worried about? What's $1 billion here, $1 billion there? Talk about how if you have to take on these additional billions of dollars, what that means for the family budget.
Yeah. So it's a great question. And all of us having lived through the COVID era know how challenging the supply chain problems that we had during that time were, and how that helped spike inflation and raise everyone's cost of living. And so that's what we would return to if we continue down this course. If we decide that we're not going to make these things and we're going to make them instead in places like China, then what's going to happen is you're going to exacerbate the supply chain challenges we have, and we're going to raise the cost of living for all Americans. And the thing is that that's top of mind for folks right now. In fact, we've done some polling on this. Morning Consult has done some polling for us, and 71% of Americans agree that the Biden administration needs to review additional restrictions from EPA more carefully. And interestingly enough, that's a bipartisan issue. Both Republicans and Democrats agree on this. So they want the EPA to take a step back, take a closer look, and then to the first part of your question, to have what they're reviewing being driven by science. And so that's unfortunately not what's happening right now. And we need them to use sound science, consider the supply chain, consider the costs on everyday Americans, and then make their decisions. So I'm not saying, Jerry, that we shouldn't have regulations. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying we can do it smarter and more effectively than what's currently on the table right now. Sorry, that was a long answer to your two questions.
It was a long question. So I, to your point, so I'm a high school football coach in my spare time. I coach baseball. I love coaching. And any coach knows that sometimes you think the referee or the umpire has it in for you. And as a coach, what you want is the umpire to call balls and strikes, right? They're going to make mistakes and these things happen, but call balls and strikes. Be fair. It seems to me recently, over the last couple or 3 years, the EPA isn't calling balls and strikes, that it's more driven by politics, driven by ideology. And what happens, again, what happens when the EPA is captured by an ideological movement versus sound science and good policy? What happens, or is my am I being too much of an alarmist there?
I think the way I would put it is bad science leads to bad policy. It's not any more complicated than that. And I think when you look at terms of this administration versus previous administrations, both Republican and Democrat. So I mentioned 13 regulations targeted at our industry right now. There are another 40 to 50 regulations in the queue behind that would be targeted at our industry. And just to give you a little context versus previous administrations, there are, this is a little in the weeds, a little wonky, but bear with me. There are 7 major regulations targeted at our industry, meaning there's a cost of $100 million or more. 7 right now. Wow. In the previous 3 administrations, going back to President Bush, President Obama, and President Trump, combined, those 3 administrations, those during this kind of the same time that we're at in the Biden administration, there were only 2 for all 3 of those administrations. With this administration, we've got 7. So you can't tell me that science is driving things when we've got that level of regulatory overreach taking place.
Our viewers, the American people, understand that Congress drives a lot. The administration, especially more recently, more executive orders, more policies driven from the Oval Office than perhaps in decades before. But what happens when regulations are moving the agenda? What happens to Congress? Is Congress doing its oversight? Is Congress policing, governing, doing their job to make sure that the administration or the agencies, regardless of if it's President Biden or President Trump, regardless of who's in the White House, is Congress doing its job, making sure oversight and that we're, again, a nation of laws, not a nation, not a nation of regulations that get through, and the American people don't know what's happening.
Yeah, I think there's a risk there, and that's what we're calling for: is additional congressional oversight of significant regulations on the chemical sector. And they need to look at EPA actions and whether those are appropriate, whether that will cut off access to products and technologies needed to make American energy, vehicles, infrastructure, healthcare, semiconductors. I mean, the list goes on. And so they do need to do their job, and we need to hold the administration accountable. And to your point, that's of either party and any administration. The Congress passes the laws, the administration implements them, but Congress has responsibility to make sure that they're implementing them appropriately. And in our case, again, I don't want to get too much in the weeds for your audience, but there's a bill that passed in 2016 called the Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA. And that's one of the primary regulations that applies to the industry. There was a bipartisan support for that law, got over 80 votes in the United States Senate. And as you know, Republicans and Democrats don't tend to agree on too many things anymore, it seems. And so there was wide bipartisan support for this. And what we're really asking for is to go back to congressional intent and go back and look at what did Congress ask for, and are we actually doing that right now? And our thought is that that's not the case, that we're headed in the wrong direction, and Congress can help redirect it in the appropriate direction.
I'm a political junkie. I do a radio show. We do podcasts. I edit and write for real clear policy. And I know this is cliche, so forgive me, but I think it's true, and cliches are true for a reason. We are in a heightened, polarized political discussion. It is. I've been in D.C. now for 2 decades. I remember years ago working with both Democrats and Republicans on good policy, good legislation. I remember working with allied groups, left center and right center, on a cause that we agreed upon. How does the political polarization impact what you're trying to do at American Chemistry?
Yeah, it's tough. It makes it challenging. And again, there's supposedly bipartisan support for manufacturing, making things in this country. And there's a lot of rhetoric around that from both parties, but we don't necessarily see actions that match the rhetoric. And I think that's the problem. So we have politicians, frankly, saying one thing and doing another. And so we're trying to shine a light on that, create some accountability and transparency. So that say, look, you need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. We've met with a lot of folks in the administration. They certainly are listening. So I don't want to accuse them of not listening to us.
Sure.
But what I am concerned about is that I need them to act. I need them to give this appropriate attention and to make sure that our concerns are addressed so that we can continue to make things in this country. Just to give you an example of this, look at the policy decisions that have been made on the European continent over the past decade. Their price of energy is 5 times what ours is. And that has nothing to do with the war in Ukraine. It's because of the bad policy decisions that they have made over this past decade. And so we can avoid that here in the United States. We've seen that movie and we know how it ends. And we need to take a different path forward. And so we're trying to shine a light on that and educate elected officials and leaders in both parties about the dangers of going down that path.
You just said something that is so true that we miss it. So again, I was a football coach. We watched film. We studied film. We studied what our opponent, what they did and how they did it. And I had a defensive coordinator who would say, Friday night's a test, but we have the answers. We have the answers to the test. It seems to me what you just said is something that I'm going to wrap my head around, maybe even write on this, and that is we've seen the future. Like we know where these policies, where they take us. And it's not, again, it's not just big corporations or those, who are more elite. These issues impact mom and pop shops, working families. I know this. Look, I know that there are families that literally they're month to month. They're paying more per month than they were a couple 3 years ago, and they're skipping on vacations. They're not getting that new car. And there's an anxiety. There's an anxiety now, and so I wonder, when you talk to members of Congress, when you talk to members of the administration, are they aware of the real anxiety Americans are feeling in terms of their economic future?
Yeah, absolutely. It's what we talk about. What we lead with is that we employ more than 500,000 Americans in the business of chemistry right now. But in addition to that, more than 7 people for every job in the business of chemistry, more than 7 people rely on our industry for their job. So that's over 4 million
Wow.
Americans that rely on chemistry for their employment. So we always point that out. We also point out that more than half of our members are small businesses. They're small manufacturers. They aren't the big, global giants that are able to sometimes navigate these challenging circumstances more ably. And so that this has a significant impact in hometowns all across the country. And so we talk about that, and then we talk about the impacts on the supply chain, the impacts on inflation, and we're going to share. This polling data is brand new, and we're going to share that information with those folks as well. Again, we're looking at 2/3, 3/4 of Americans agreeing on these issues in political battleground states across the country. Republicans and Democrats are all worried about this. You look at the right track, wrong track numbers on the economy. I mean, it's off the charts. And so, yes, it's our job to educate those elected officials on those concerns and to say, here's something you can do about that. And again, congressional oversight, looking at permitting, looking at addressing some of the regulations that are pending right now are good ways to address those pocketbook issues.
Yeah. Sometimes, and I've worked for a member of Congress and I respect what they do. I think it's an honor to serve in Congress, and it's too bad that sometimes now, the respect for members, the respect for government service isn't what it used to be. And that's bipartisan too. I mean, you talk to a Democrat, you talk to a Republican, they're not pleased with Washington, D.C. But that being said, it seems you have all the components. Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, when he was putting together the agenda back in '94, every item on the agenda for America had to poll at 70 to 80%, because he understood that after it got through the media grind, it'd go from 70 to 65 or 70 to 55. But if you had an issue where 70% bipartisan, the American people were behind you, then you had a winning issue. And so you have bipartisan support. You've hit that 70% number. 7 Americans are tied to American chemistry jobs. Everyone wants manufacturing back. It doesn't matter on your partisan persuasion in terms of we see China as at least an economic threat and we want American jobs here. All your components are there. How is it working through the media to get this good message, this positive message? How is it working through the media to get your message out?
Well, so the story, the saying that if it bleeds, it leads, right?
Yes.
So bad news is always easier to get out there than good news, and so sometimes that's a challenge for us because, as you and I were talking earlier, chemistry makes modern life possible.
Yes.
And again, everything from your iPhone to your auto to your home to the clothes you wear, literally life-saving medicines, literally everything starts with chemistry. And so, telling that good story sometimes is to the news media is not as interesting.
Yes.
Or saying to them, we're actually okay with regulation. It just matters how you do it. Sometimes that's not as sexy as some of the other stories in the media these days, or the idea that we need to work together. To your point about people serving in Congress, the vast majority of those men and women are there for the right reason. They're trying to make the world a better place, trying to make our country stronger. And that's where we are too. We are better working together. We are better, working together, innovating. That's what chemistry is all about. It's in our DNA. It's in our products, and it should be in our policies. And so this idea of bringing people together to manufacture more in this country may not be headline news, but that's the story we're going to keep telling. And if that means that we have to point out the dangers of not going down that path, of becoming an economy like Europe, where they can no longer fend for themselves, where they're relying on others for energy, but that their industry is declining. I mean, we're literally seeing the deindustrialization of Europe right now.
Yeah.
If we've got to scare people into that, so be it. That's not what I'd prefer to do. But if that's the path we have to take to get our message across so we get good policy, then that's what we'll have to do.
Well, it's something that I've been thinking about is that if a lot of the regulations, not just on American chemistry, but American pharmaceutical companies, American oil companies, American technology companies, it seems that they're in politics today. When you say religion, people think of Catholicism, church, the synagogue, the mosque. That's religion. But just like I said earlier, that we are more polarized today, I think, than we were in the last, in the last 20 years or so. At least my political lifespan. I also think that there are certain segments of the public discussion where it's not about the science. It's not even about good policy. It's about an ideology or religiosity. And so therefore, in order for them to push their agenda, they have to create a boogeyman. There has to be a bad actor. And for some reason, American industry is an easy boogeyman. And what I want to wrap my head around, and when I've talked to folks, even Democrats and Republicans, American industry has lifted more people out of poverty. American free enterprise, American innovation, American science. We lead the world in some of these areas. And yet there is a segment of the public discourse that wants to make it into a bad actor, make it into a boogeyman. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with exactly what you've outlined there. I'm a strong believer in American exceptionalism and American innovation. And by every measure, the environment is cleaner than it was 50 years ago when the EPA was created. Our air is cleaner, our water is cleaner. Now, do we have more work to do? Yes, we do. Now, the business of chemistry will help us get there with alternative forms of energy and with continuing to make progress. For example, when you have more plastic in a vehicle, you lightweight that vehicle and you have less emissions. That's just one example of that. So it's unfortunate that sometimes people, their business model is to scare people so that they can raise money to advance their ideological agenda. But that's the world we live in, and that's maybe not the world we'd want it, but that's the world where we have it. And so I can give you an example of this. Michael Bloomberg is spending $85 million launching a campaign against our industry, and he's attacking us with misinformation and wants to stop our industry from operating. At the same time, as we've discussed already, we make modern life possible. At the same time, we've helped get good policy passed here in the past year that would actually reduce our impact on the climate. And for example, there's something called the Kigali Amendment. And again, I apologize to your audience.
No, I'm familiar with it, but go ahead.
So in the United States Senate, believe it or not, a year ago yesterday, we passed a climate treaty that got bipartisan support. So to pass a treaty in the United States Senate, you have to get 2/3 vote. So you got more than 2/3 vote for a treaty that will eliminate hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, replace them with advanced materials that our members make in the heating and air conditioning space. And this is really geeky and the weed stuff.
No, it's not. This is good stuff.
By itself would reduce warming in the environment by the end of the century by 0.5 degree. We're trying to get 1.5 degrees less to impact climate change. We get a third of the way there with just this change. Nobody in the world knows that this has happened. Nobody is aware of this. So we're going to continue to try to tell our story about how we are making that possible, because we got that passed because the ACC helped get that through the United States Senate, and it's our members are going to make that happen. So we're going to keep telling stories like this until government decision makers actually understand that and act accordingly.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about there's that story where the news says a torrential rain and flood is coming, and the man in the house says, I'm gonna pray to God and ask God to help me. I'm gonna stay here in my house. And then his house floods, and the police rescue comes. Say, sir, come with us. Floods are coming. No. God's going to help me. You don't worry about it. And then the story is, then he's on top of his roof, and a helicopter comes, and then a boat comes, and eventually he drowns. And he goes up to heaven, and he's like, hey, God, I had faith. I was waiting for you the whole time. He's like, I sent you a boat. I sent you a helicopter. I sent you the fire and rescue. I kept on giving you the answer to your question, and you kept on ignoring it. It seems to me in politics, it's very similar. We're concerned, right? Vice President Harris talked about just recently about climate anxiety, how young people are thinking differently about buying homes and having families. We hear about in Africa, clean water is needed. We hear about we have to bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. We talk about how it's harder to raise a family today because of inflation but yet the answer's in front of us. The innovative industries and companies are right in front of us, offering us, and I believe this to be true. If some of these regulations were allowed to go without someone pushing back, we would be living, and correct me if I'm wrong, it'd be like living in 1860 again. Things that we take for granted at a low cost, by the way. Remember, Americans enjoy this great innovation at a price point that other countries are envious. We have it in front of us all the time, and yet we're like that guy in the flooded house. We keep on looking for some other answer. I keep on asking you this because I'm hoping for how do we break through? I guess it's consistency. What do you think?
Yeah, we're playing the long game here too, right?
Yeah.
So and
Yes.
continuing with that message that American success relies on American chemistry. And so, that's part of this campaign at chemistrycreates.org that we have just launched this past week to
Tell us a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
And to point out again, whether it's automobiles, whether it's healthcare essentials, building and construction, rebuilding our infrastructure, again, that relies on chemistry as well. And so if the Biden administration wants to achieve its goals in the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, CHIPS and Science Act, semiconductors. So, for example, just tell you a quick story. You need 500 different chemistries to manufacture a computer chip, right? So the Biden administration and Congress have worked very hard to onshore the supply chain for that. Well, the EPA is looking to ban 5 different chemistries that you need to manufacture semiconductors. That doesn't make any sense, to your point about connecting the dots on these issues. So that's what we're trying to point out right now is look, the decisions that EPA makes has consequences. They don't understand the consequences. Can you partner with industry? Can you talk to industry? Can you work with us to get the environmental benefits that you're looking for, but to make sure that we can continue to manufacture these things in the United States for the benefit of all Americans?
We were talking about congressional authority and responsibility in terms of oversight, but you just made a very good point. So the Biden administration is working toward a policy goal in technology, but the EPA, it seems at times, is working counter to what the White House wants. So what about within the administration? What about oversight the White House, the executive, has over the executive agencies?
Yep. We have, it's a really good point and a really good question. We have a situation where the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, quite literally. And so that's why we're asking for somebody within the administration, preferably in the White House, with economic expertise who can objectively assess the impact of these regulations on the supply chain, on the ability to achieve these national goals, whether it's supply chain, trade, national security, energy, climate, healthcare, infrastructure, innovation. Quite honestly, we need somebody who is their job. They get up every day to make sure that the federal government is making decisions that help enable those goals and not hinder them.
And again, it doesn't make a difference if it's Joe Biden in the White House. And again, I know there's a lot of politics and you can be critical or praise Joe Biden, but the fact of the matter is what we're talking about here is at the end of the day, who was it? Ed Koch. Ed Koch was the Democrat mayor of New York City. I'm from New York originally. And Ed Koch famously said, there is no Democrat or Republican way to pick up the garbage. Right? Sanitation makes no difference who you voted for. The people who live here want the garbage picked up. Well, the same thing here. You could go to a household that are Democrats and voted for Biden Harris, or you can go to a household Republican that voted for Trump Pence. But you ask them about saving money, college for their kids, their grocery bills, about jobs, the future, their kids graduate college, what future they have. When you talk to them about medicine and purchasing a vehicle, all these issues, or hey, is dad or mom going to be laid off because manufacturing is moving overseas? And that's not just building things. This is technology now too. So it runs the gamut. So again, does that resonate with policymakers in the White House staff? I know Congress, run by congressmen, but staff has a lot of power, and congressional staff and committee staff. Do they get it that the American people, bipartisan, have had enough and want change?
Yeah, indeed. And I think, we're in the job of connecting those dots for them and helping them understand that. And, I'll cut them a little bit of slack and say, look, the federal government is a multi-trillion-dollar enterprise.
Yeah, it's very big. It's very big.
It's huge. And it's involved in everything. And, we could have a conversation about, fixing that some other time. But just to say, look, they have a lot on their plate. And so I understand that and respect that. And so it's our job, our responsibility to make sure that they understand the impacts of the decisions that they make. And again, we do not always see that in Congress. We do not always see that in the administration, regardless of party. Again, and this applies to all administrations, as to your point earlier. And it's our job to connect all those dots for them and to explain there's bipartisan consensus. 2/3, 3/4 of Americans are concerned about the cost of living. They're concerned about the supply chain. They're concerned about putting food on their family's plate. And to the extent that government makes decisions that hinders that, the American people, both Republicans and Democrats, are concerned about that. And they want us to do a better job of governing ourselves, governing our country, and driving forward in making things in this country and making life more affordable for everyday Americans.
And again, we're going to wrap things up, but it does seem to me, if you look at some of the great policy successes over the past, a decade or so, it involves public-private partnerships where the government and the private sector work together toward a goal. We just saw it recently with Operation Warp Speed. We saw that the public health community and the innovative pharma companies worked together and got a vaccine. Now, again, I know there's controversies around the vaccine, that sort of thing. I'm not commenting on that. What I'm saying is that it was a innovative miracle to get a vaccine to market in 10 months, something that usually takes 10 years. Are there any opportunities for the American Chemistry Council, or are there areas where you're partnering with the scientific community outside of your industry or with government partners to kind of push forward a good policy?
Yeah, so yes, there are, and I appreciate you ending on a positive note. There's been a lot of concerns that I've expressed today, but I am bullish on the future of America, the future of our industry, and American ingenuity and innovation. There's a variety of things that our industry is helping to drive going forward that we can be tremendously proud of. I've talked about some of them already in terms of infrastructure, for example, and rebuilding roads
Yeah.
and bridges and with new materials that will make them last longer, for example, and carry more traffic going forward. Whether it's healthcare essentials, you mentioned life-saving vaccines. You couldn't have done that without our industry, right? You look at high-tech auto parts and electric vehicles going forward. Look, if people are looking for opportunities to, as Steve Jobs said, make a dent in the universe, right, to change the world, the business of chemistry is a fantastic place to do that. And there's tremendous opportunities in our space. So this economy is going to need 1 million more STEM employees by 2030: science,
Yeah.
technology, engineering, and math. And so we're open for business. And so instead of sitting there creating another app on your phone, what we do is we make change at scale. Our engineers drive change at scale. So if you talk about semiconductor chips, you talk about the implementation of the the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and addressing climate. Our industry is where that's happening, and it's really exciting, and I'm really bullish about the future and working with government in partnership to drive positive change going forward.
You just said it. I like it. Open for business. The show is the business of America. AmericanChemistry.com is where our audience can go and look more closely at your Chemistry Creates, America Competes initiative, but also just understand more about the industry. Chris, John, I appreciate your time. This is important. I hope that this is a first conversation, and then we can have more conversations moving forward about positive change, about how your industry is creating jobs and allowing for human flourishing. Essentially, that's what you do. Chemistry allows for human flourishing, and that doesn't have a party affiliation. It's just good business. It's sound science, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
This has been the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast, hosted by Jerry Rogers. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream